DevOps Iterations.
Why, Al? Why did we do this the day after the election? Why did I schedule this for that morning? What was I thinking? Dear viewers, this is the day after the US election. And it turns out, spoiler alert, what you think was going to happen probably didn't happen.
Okay, Gary, thanks and welcome to 8th episode of Abnormal DevOps Iterations. Well, when this will be broadcasted, probably it will be a memory, the election day at least, but I guess will be the present for you all in the USA. But we are not here to talk about politics. We are here to talk about abnormal DevOps stuff, iterations, and whatever. So, Gary, first of all, how are you?
How am I? How are you? Everybody in the US today is going, oh, how am I? I'm great, Al. Doing okay this morning, surviving. How are you doing?
Oh, I'm fine. I'm totally fine. By the way, what are you doing in this part of your life in terms of works activities?
You sound like my mother. Gary, what are you doing now?
With things like computers?
Yeah. Al and I know each other from back in the day when we were both, slinging the good word of Puppet. Al was the first ever Puppet consultant. And I actually met Al back in 2009. I think that was the very, very, very first Puppet camp. That was at San Francisco State.
In this university thing.
Yeah. And where I had come from is I'm originally from Ohio. I was doing computer stuff there at Ohio, working for a school that had no money and thinking about automation in 2009, because every year we would, do all the lab machines and then the teacher machines and that. And I was like, this is repetitive and annoying and I keep forgetting stuff. And so I was looking for a way to fix that. And I saw a post by Jeff McCune talking about this thing called Puppet on Macs. And I just threw myself headfirst into it and was like, this is great. But I was one of 3 people in the world using it on Macs. Nigel Kirsten being the other one at Google. It was like Google, this kid in Ohio, right? And then some other people talking about Puppet on Mac. And so that led me to work for Puppet, doing professional services all over the place. That's how we interacted. But I left there in 2016-ish. Jeff McCune, coincidentally, who also grew up less than an hour from me in Ohio, and taken a similar path. He went to Ohio State. I went to Ohio State. He stayed and passed. I did not. And he went out to Portland for Puppet, but we became friends there. And I realized very quickly, you know what you're talking about. You get it. And so he had left in, I think, 2015 to go do his own thing that he called open infrastructure. And at 2016, after Luke was gone, after the EMC folks had come in, after Sanjay was in, and we had a bunch of presentations where me and Carousels were in the back of the room going, something's changing. I decided to break off and go out on my own. And Jeff had started that consulting firm. So I jumped in with him, was like, sure, let's do Puppet, but also other things, right? We'll do Puppet, but let's move on with the industry. Because when you're in professional services for a company, you're just doing the one thing and you feel like you're missing out on other stuff. So if you don't do it yourself, you feel like you're, at that point, containerization was happening and the world was changing. So with Jeff, we did a lot of things. We became Google partners. We did a lot of moving people over to the Google Cloud, because at one point, I think Google realized people weren't using Google Cloud. Why aren't they using Google Cloud? Well, there aren't a lot of people that know Google Cloud out there. There aren't a lot of consultants. How do we get people onto Google Cloud? Well, we need consultants to know more about Google Cloud. How do we do that? Well, let's pay them all to come and like work on Google Cloud and then learn it for us. So there was a period of time where I think Google was basically hiring all of the consultants that it knew to, like, knowing Google, I'm sure internally we're all stack ranked and numbered and whatever. But we got to doing that work. I was working for a company where when I got in, they were ripping out Puppet and moving over to Terraform. And the guy had seen a presentation that I had done and was like, hi, I built all of this based on what you told me to do. And I was like, I'm sorry, we're ripping it out. But migrating folks over to the cloud, we were doing a lot of like Terraform work around then, Vault work, that type of stuff. We, with that Google agreement, got hooked up into a gig for Twitter, which was really interesting because Twitter had, they probably don't have anymore. Twitter had a very large fleet. We're talking hundreds of thousands of nodes. And they had a very large problem in that Puppet changes were happening too fast. They didn't have a whole lot of visibility into what was happening. And so, like, a firewall change with Puppet accidentally made it through testing and started turning on the firewall on a bunch of machines that then they dropped off like the map to Twitter. And so suddenly thousands of machines were just dropping off visibility, all because of
falling around.
Yeah, and okay. At that point, I think it might have even affected like a Twitter outage. There may be a Twitter outage. Actually, I'm sure there are Twitter outages due to Puppet. But they were like, we can't do this anymore. We can't have Puppet changes propagate so quickly. We need a more slower, granular. First, we need visibility, but then we need blast radiuses. So if it blows up, it doesn't take down the whole ship. We need people who can do that with Puppet. And if you know anything about Puppet, you know that this functionality is not built into Puppet. And if you talk to people, oh, how would you do that? Like, it's usually like, there's all sorts of strategies. So anyway,
well, my personal opinion is very critical machines should not run in enforcing mode during production times. No, for the win. Very critical. I know that there is this philosophical debate in Puppet community about, no, Puppet is there to manage changes and everything. But if you have to be scared of on doing any change because you can risk to break the machines that run your business, no way. Make them run in op, run Puppet when you feel like you are comfortable with that.
Sure, that's a strategy.
And of course, maybe some machines running enforcing the testing machines to validate your changes.
Right.
But anyway, there are various strategies. And so what you came up with in your case?
We effectively, because they were using open source, they've never used like the enterprise version. They've been adopters since the early days. Like, Twitter's been around for a long time, and they've been using Puppet for an awful long time with their bare metal machines, and they had a good amount of bare metal machines all over the world. So it made sense for them. So we built them visibility tools where we actually used, because they were Google partners, they had a lot of credits. We built in BigQuery a visualization tool for Puppet report data. We couldn't ingest all of the reports from all of the hundreds of thousand machines because that would just blow everything out of the water. That was their problem back then. The actual Puppet tools didn't scale for them. They were too big for like enterprise Puppet. So we built a way to selectively take a sample of all the machines and then ingest it into BigQuery, and then using back then, before it was Looker, it was like the Visual Studio tool that they have, just like graphs of changes and errors and resource types. We could do really cool things, dig deep down into a specific resource and see over a time period, select a time period, what was it happening, to narrow in on when things were breaking. Because at Twitter, when they rolled a Puppet change, they didn't really know whether it worked until they had like metrics, like if any of the metrics were spiking, errors were spiking, or like a service went down, then they would dig into it. But they would push changes and be like, okay,
Let's see.
Let's see. We walked in and we're like, let's see. That's how you do things here. And yeah, it was the tail end of move fast and break things. And when they broke stuff, they had knowledge internally to fix it very quickly and to remedy that. But that was also the problem, was that, we want to break things, but in a controlled fashion so that before it expands everywhere, we have a chance to fix it. So we built them a visualization tool. We also then built a whole, using native new resource objects. I forget what they're called, but we built a system to wrap individual changes and give yourself like two states. We built a finite state machine inside Puppet where you could say, here's the resources affected by the change and the data. Here is how they are currently, wrap how it is currently. Let's suggest this change that is wrapped within this object called state B. And then let's attach a schedule to it where we can say, roll out 10% of this data center the first hour, and then 30%, and then maybe all, right? And the cool thing about this is you had resources in like state A and state B. And if something was wrong, you could snap back to state A, which was known to work immediately. You had that rollback. Rollback of Puppet is a hard thing because, like, if you add resources, new resources that weren't there before, you have to remove that stuff out. Well, what if state A, that resource didn't exist and it was in state B? Well, we had a release valve to ensure things absent that weren't there before. We built this really cool system we called incremental change. And then we used that for a while, but then we built an automated system to roll these out based on, they had an internal system called automatic canarying that you could just, canary some changes out. If a change was failing with their mature systems that weren't Puppet, they had a way to roll back. They wanted to use Puppet in this system they had internally for automatically canarying changes. And so like Jeff came in and wired that up for them. And so what we had was people now using Puppet the same way they used their native tools. We had less fear of like doing changes because if it broke, like we knew we could roll back successfully, and we did. We proved this out very, very early. Twitter went from, I was going to say, I was under NDA then. It's a whole different company now. I'm not going to go into
so you can talk.
Yeah, but I'm not going to go into the specifics, but they were having Puppet related outages frequently, like to the range of at least one every quarter. And by the time we left, they didn't have a Puppet related outage within an entire calendar year because they had been using this incremental change. So Are
they still using Puppet as far as you know?
Who the hell knows what they're running inside at Twitter? Like, we were there when Elon came on and saw firsthand that happen. We were still contractors and we saw everybody drop off the map. I'm not sure if they're using Puppet. I really, really, really don't know because I don't know anybody who's still there anymore. That's how few people are left. I do know the stories of like what happened there. I do know there is a funny book that somebody published called TwitTunes that like describes the process internally of what happened when Elon came on. That if you want to know a little bit more, like look up that book. It's funny. I don't know, but I can't imagine. I know that when we were there, they were wanting to lean in more into proper Kubernetes because Twitter had like Mesos, like the pre-Kubernetes thing that they were using. So before Elon came in, they were wanting to, lean more into Kubernetes. Who knows what the heck they're doing now?
This mentioning of Mesos reminds me one of the losers of the orchestrators wars, so to say. And this brings me to the next question, which is about, as consultant, as a person who works in the IT, when you have to embrace some technologies, sometimes you don't learn and spend time. You don't know if these technologies are going to stay, go away, win or lose their own competition wars. And that's tricky. What's your standing in front of this dilemma?
Yeah. Well, for us, We live, in America that's still capitalist for right now. That it's kind of like follow the money. What are people looking for? At this point, we are the consultants that have been around for a while. I think about this when you finally realize your superpower in life, and when you realize where you're supposed to fit, and then you think back, like I'm awfully thankful for the time that I was born in, because I was 15 in 95, where AOL, like in America, like the internet finally expanded, and I was 20 when I started working at the school and doing things with Mac there. And so I've got to live through all the generations of automation, like trying it in every generation. Let's try it with scripts and Radmind and, CF Engine, and then maybe Puppet or whatever. At this point, you kind of know what the tool is meant to do, or you kind of know what's happening, and you can pick up very quickly on the specifics. There's going to be objects or some sort of language. It's going to have to fit together. Networking is going to have to be here. Like the new tools, you just have to learn, what is that construct? In Terraform, it's this network-based graph. How do they maintain state? It's an actual state file. Okay. How do you split up modules? Well, we did this in the Puppet ways. Where's your organizational specific data? How can we loop through that? And then you kind of like learn the tooling. So for us, there have been cases where we didn't know the tool and we were honest ahead of time and said, hey, we're not familiar with this. We have a good standing. We're quick on the uptake, and we have learned on the job. That doesn't work for everybody. You kind of have to go where you are passionate and what strikes you as emotionally the right thing. Because a wise man once said, actually, I think it was just Kelsey Hightower that said, that software development is emotional. There is a lot of emotion in there. And when you look at the complexities inside, like, again, if we keep going back to Puppet, because that's our shared history, providers, there is a lot of toil and hate and emotion inside there. There's complexity and reason for that. So the tools that we have enjoyed, we have realized that people have left these escape hatches. They follow the model. There is complexity there. It does what you want. It doesn't get in the way. And you kind of know where bottlenecks are going to happen. If I like hard code a lot of things in one file, that's not going to be scalable. This tool allows to break it out that way. So I think you have to follow the work. You have to follow your gut and your history from what you have used that's out there. And honestly, sometimes it's just a crapshoot. As consultants, yes, we have to build up certifications, or we have to build up word of mouth and friendships in the industry. And us being on the West Coast of the US, we are very, very fortunate because we're close to Silicon Valley. So we bump into the people at all these jobs, like literally physically bump into them when we go to places. And word of mouth takes us a long way. But if you're very like separated from that, then you kind of have to be online, check what social media is doing, check what people are saying. It's a weird thing in my life that I wholeheartedly credit Twitter with getting me to use Puppet in my job, because I was in the Midwest. I wasn't bumping into these people. I had to be connected and see what they were talking about to learn what I should be doing. Twitter got me the job at Puppet, and then ultimately learning Puppet got me the job at Twitter to fix all these problems, until a billionaire came in and said, no, I just want to take this. So it was an interesting spin, but I'd say you have to be connected. You really have to be connected. And as much as I kind of hate social media now, because I hate the propaganda and the way that it has been used and abused, there are still small spaces that you can find that people have carved out. Like if you go to Blue Sky right now, Blue Sky now is kind of what tech Twitter was back in 2009. It is the people that you care about without all of the noise. Everyone else hasn't figured it out yet. You can ask legitimate questions. You get good feedback. You might not get a lot of it. If you had 1 million followers in Twitter, you might have 10,000, in Blue Sky, but you feel more connected. And the signal to noise ratio, there is way much more signal than there is to noise right now. And so that is what I have personally dialed back in to kind of see where the industry is. because we as consultants are moving on to, we like to think we're moving on to layers of other tools. Like when I had left Puppet, I was like, I don't want to do any of that ever again. Like I want to close the book on that. And then of course Twitter was like, hey, we need help with Puppet. And like Jeff had to drag me kicking and screaming, being like, it's at scale, it's going to be fun, they're meaningful problems, you get carte blanche. And it was. But we're definitely ready to move on, and we have. I mentioned Terraform. Terraform kind of like became the tool du jour of, at least for cloud services, that we had to learn and use, and we ended up using all over the place. And recently, HashiCorp, we got a call because we know a lot of people who work at HashiCorp. Surprise, they're a lot of the same old Puppet people. But HashiCorp was building a certification exam for Terraform. They built one for Vault, and it's this professional level, which is like you need to use Vault in production. It's an interesting exam because it's not only multiple choice, but they have scenarios that they present you with and say, you need to do the thing, configure it this way, or troubleshoot this, and let us know if this request will work. It was really an interesting exam. And Zach Smith, who used to work at Puppet, is over there kind of as their ops person to help build this exam. But if you know Zach Smith, and I have from back in the Mac days, from long, long ago, Zach Smith is a one-man show. And to follow him with all the different technologies he used, like it was hard kind of finding a backfill person to be like, can somebody help Zach out so he doesn't have to be always on the button. So they wanted somebody to help that, but also they were building a Terraform exam. And so we got the call because we have, done this before. So for the past year or so, I've been helping them out building a Terraform authoring and operations pro exam that just went live September. And so that's kind of how the knowledge that I took with me through those previous generations, I have applied with all the experience that I had setting up Terraform. Like if you actually take this exam, and if you are like a professional, you should. It is difficult, but it is good. The scenarios in those exams come from things that we literally have had customers ask us to do in the past. And it is an AWS focused exam, but like when we were developing these scenarios and we needed to target certain things, I was like, oh, I remember this one. And so we've had a lot of good feedback from that, with people saying, I know AWS, these are things we've had to do with AWS. So I am somebody who needs to take exams, but also I am somebody who has helped build some of these exams. And I try to build an exam that myself personally, I would feel challenged by. And so that's an exam that I recommend if you're in that.
Definitely, you did it. So
yeah, I can't say I built it. It's terrible. Run away.
So complaints are going to you, of course.
I mean, the complaint box is open, but it just redirects to Elon at Twitter. So good luck.
Talking about technologies and follow the money and what is cool and what, let's say, warms your soul. Is there any tool, not the usual suspects, which you would recommend starting to use or try or learn?
Yeah, well, I think the world has been moving to containerization for a long time. Puppet is definitely bare metal. There's a move to the cloud, but then there's also a move to containerizations. And once you have containerized services, then the problem becomes, how do we shuttle these containers around all over the place so that we no longer need to worry about the bare metal? And that's where, Kubernetes has spun up. It's not the new person in town. It's been around for a while. But as consultants, we don't ever get to use the new hotness tool because people aren't usually paying for that thing. They're usually paying us to support the old stuff that we know. But the platform engineering has sort of risen on the backs of what DevOps had previously been. And the concept of platforms also is connected to the concept of breaking things down into their component parts so that we can shift them around on different clusters of machines without having to worry about the hardware underneath. And so that's where I see the world is right now. Everybody is engrossed with this platform engineering. I did watch the video with you and Nigel, and he is now at Platform.sh, following the good word of platforming that's out there. But in the Kubernetes space, we at Puppet, or excuse me, I keep saying that, but we at Open Infrastructure, so myself, Jeff, and then Nate McCurdy, the three of us, our time at Twitter, what we took away from there was they had a great platform that allowed people, employees, to self-service their way into things very easily. Like when we come on site with you customers don't usually have all that sort of automation figured out, because that's why they're bringing us in. But we came into a place that had, like, for example, we had built a visibility application and a catalog diff tooling for them. And at the time, we built it out of Python because there was a lot of Python experience internally. But you have this Python service. How do you deploy that? Well, they made it very easily where they were like, look, if you've written in Python, you can wrap it this way, deploy it on Mesos this way. You can self-service a route that comes in the front end of twitter.com just by filling out these forms or whatever. Connect that through to your application. You get visibility, you get metrics, you get that canarying service to like canary changes. They had these golden paths that very easily, with just a little bit of data, you could spin up your application and begin doing work. And that was the experience. We were like, that's really awesome. Like, that's the thing they've really figured out. We want to bring that experience to customers but customers, it seems like, have been chasing. It was like the Heroku experience from 2009, that everybody mentions. Oh, we have this application. Can you just make it go somewhere? And then also give us metrics and visibility. And then if we need to upgrade, it's just a button that we push. Like, and since we're here, I want a pony and like whatever. So that experience, we saw the tools that they had stitched together. We learned a lot from the data and their validation, most specifically the validation and CI/CD tools that just gave you what you want as long as it passed tests. So when we left Twitter, we finally got a chance to jump into Kubernetes and stitch these things together. Like, okay, we want Prometheus, we want Grafana, we want, external authorization so that you just use your Google account and OIDC. And then we want every, application to have this security-based front end that has tokens that feed to the application so that immediately you're authenticated with one button. We want that whole experience. So we started, basically at scratch with Kubernetes, and we're like, okay, what are the tools? How do you do this? And people said, use Helm. Helm is your solution. It's like package management for Kubernetes. And so when we used it, it's more like a Puppet module than package management. You need a special incantation of values that passed, and maybe you get what you want if you're lucky, but you never get everything. You get like 80%, but something's wrong. And then what do? The Helm chart is owned by somebody else. This is also the Puppet problem. Do you send a patch and hope they fix it? Do you fork it and use your patch? Do you pull things locally? What is the state of like Kubernetes tooling? And when we asked people, they were like, oh, use Customize. Customize is this tool that, until recently I found out, I was like, it's got a janky syntax. Well, it uses the documented like JSON patch standard that I didn't realize. It just uses the standard to be able to change bits. But you had to know that you had to start with Helm, and then you have to take the data from Helm and feed it through to Customize, and then you need to learn Customize syntax, and then you need to wrap all of that together, but then you need to pass in the organizational data for like your domain so that both of those tools have access to it. How do you stitch all of this together? And we asked people, like, surely there must be tools to do this. Like in the Puppet world, we had R10K and Puppet modules and roles and profiles and everything. In Terraform, they had TerraGrunt and have TerraGrunt, which is kind of like a way to wrap Terraform and split out environments and pass through data. Where was that for Kubernetes? And what we found was either people were like rolling their own shell scripts, because shell ought to be good enough for anybody. shell and 128K ought to be enough. Or at the other end, there were these vendors that were giving you a platform in a box, kind of like what we thought we wanted. Hey, there's this tool, it's a whole ass platform, and there's some other stuff in there. And inside the tool is the way that you can specify Helm charts and data and pass that through, but you got to like subscribe to the platform in a box .sh. And so we didn't want a whole software like tool to use. And we started using shell scripts. As we learned this, we plumbed it because Jeff McCune is the shell script master of like making sure to use it the right way, validating it, not going too far. But we just had spent so much time curating these scripts because there's a lot of time building up the context in which you call Helm and pass the right data in the right way and gather the data. And then we were just spending so much time with these scripts that we finally said, we can't find this tool. Maybe it exists, but let's just start building it. And then we'll talk about it and somebody on the internet will tell us we're wrong. And then we'll go and use that other thing. And we'll use the experience as a way to learn Go and see what other languages are out there. So we started building this tool that we called Holos, Holos, which is like short for holistic, because if you look up the definition of holistic, which I'm doing right now because I did the same thing. Why is it called Holos? Well, holistic is characterized by the belief that the parts of something are interconnected and can only be explained by reference to the whole. That's what we were doing. Separate islands of these Helm charts and customize bases that needed to be integrated together and then create something bigger. So we started in Go, like just wrapping the calls to Helm and then customize and then passing through the data. And we knew we needed to deal with data underneath the hood. And from the Puppet days, again, what's the data tool that they used for everything? Hira, the first words of hierarchy. And Hira was just, it was great for what it was, but it was like, here's a list. Start shoveling shit into this list so that by the end of the hierarchy, maybe you have what you want. And there's not really any validation unless you bolt it on somewhere, or at the very end, you pass it through to Puppet and you use the type system. And then if it's wrong, at that point, it'll tell you it's wrong. And then you have to go fix it and everything. And so we knew we wanted the ability to set data up here at the top. Like you have a security team that says, here are the versions of like the containers you need to use or the actions or whatever. Nobody can change those. We need to set those here. But then we have platform teams that create abstractions that other teams will use because they say, oh, we want these Helm charts or this application or data. And so when we were at Twitter, we had found out about this tool called Q or QLang. Have you ever heard of Q?
A Q as a Q the letter?
CUE. CUE.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not an expert about it. But...
Yeah. And at Twitter, one of our colleagues they were refactoring a lot of proxies that they were doing, the Envoy proxy. And so they had used Q because Q had focused on the ability to pass in language, pass in data and constructs, but also be able to merge data at different levels, but then also had first-class validation built in. And so we looked at Q, and the guy who created Q, Marcel, has done some talks that are really interesting. They're very short, and they hit right to the point. He had worked at Google. He had helped with the Borg configuration language that they had used, but kind of broke away from them to create this product that specified like unification of values. It was kind of like Hira in that you sort of had levels. You had a top level, the root of the tree, and then recursively down the tree, Q just scans for all files. And then it knows that recursively down the tree, you can fill in different values. So like in Q, you can create an object that says, here's this thing, it's a platform. It should have a name field. We'll give it a default value. But then let's have components, but leave this field open so that this field will get populated down the tree as people use it. but then also has first-class validation. You can pass in regex. This host field needs to be the lowercase DNS label, no spaces. Use the regex. Or, it's a port, so it's an integer, but then it also needs to be greater than 0, but less than 95, all that stuff, right? We thought this was awesome. It felt like the next generation of Hira on steroids, the same thing, specifying data, now with validation, now with merging and unification. So we threw Q into the mix, and we built this tool that we are using internally for our platform to manage all sorts of, whether it's Helm or customize or just raw data, to build the platform that we wanted for customers internally that we then use. And we just recently released it. If you go to holos.run, that is where our tool is. It's open source. It's Apache 2.0. We're not trying to get rich on this. We're trying to take what we've learned from the past of like doing automation and being consultants and use it for a tool with Kubernetes, a tool that we would want to use because, surprise, we're using it. And that a tool that was meant to be like an accelerator for when consultants come in and our customers say, hey, we're going with Kubernetes. We had these problems. Like, how can we fix them? Well, this is the tool that's the way that we would have fixed those sort of things.
Okay, so the new tool to learn and to follow is your tool, which actually makes sense.
I mean, I'm talking about it because that's the thing that's going on. But I think people should focus on that struggle, because it was that struggle of trying to use Helm and trying to figure out where to put the data, because most people will just write a script and forget about it and put some documentation and say, whatever, this is good enough for me because I don't need it to be. But for us, since we've done this enough, we immediately are looking for ways to fix it. So when approaching tools out there, use it, see what delights you, see what annoys you, see what people are talking about it, and then commit to actually like fixing bugs, finding problems. That whole process will get you into the inside of whatever that community is. There will be work. It's not like you're going to, with us, since we just launched this tool and you're talking about consultants, what should they learn? You probably shouldn't learn our tool as the first thing if you're a new consultant, because that's probably not going to give you business.
Not yet. Where is the money, at least, for the moment?
Yeah. Find something that's going to pay the bills so that you have consistent work. Because in this economy, with layoffs in IT, surprise, the work is still out there. They're just cutting people to meet some sort of bottom dollar or whatever. We're still finding that there are projects and that there are things that people need to do now more than ever. It's just you have to work harder to find where everybody's talking about it, meetups, local things, that sort of stuff. And it's hard.
So this is also interesting. All these layoffs, at the same time, there is still a lot of IT-related works around, definitely. And in this sense, all this hype and not only hype about AI, how do you see the full scenario here?
I recently went to HashiConf, and that was in, the beginning of October. Yeah, 14th. And so I went home back to Ohio. I went to the school that I used to work at, that my sister still teaches at, and I know many of the teachers and talked to them. And I actually asked them the same question. It was like, how can you be a teacher in the dawn of AI? How does that change the way you work? And you had people that had the reactions that you would expect. Oh, it's evil, it's the devil. Oh, it's cool, it's the next new hotness. But then you had pragmatic teachers that said, look, I think we need to treat this as like the calculator in the past age, that there are certain places that it should not be used. If you are learning grammar and English and structure and lower levels, AI is probably not going to help you. But if you are at the higher end with like seniors that are going out into the business world now, and that they're going to use it in the back end anyway, whether they cite it or not, you need to lean into the fact of, how do you use this appropriately? How do you find the hallucinations? How do you check your work so you're not passing in the work? I remember back in 1995. I was in high school, and a friend of mine, well, it would have had to been after Google, so this is probably closer to 98, used like an online translator for a Spanish class. But it was a translator in, Barcelona, where they've got a completely different dialect, and turned in a paper that was in, not Castilian Spanish, but some other form of Spanish, where the teacher was like, what do you think I am here? That sort of thing is that use it, understand the way to use it, know what its faults are. Like for us, Jeff has been using it a lot with things that he writes. Because it is a large language model that has a whole bunch of text, it is really great at formatting your, saying, I want to convey this. How do I put this all together logically? Great. Really great. Cool. That saves me a lot of time. It is not great to learn a technology that you don't understand. I tried to just throw some problems. I do a lot of serving things at home. And I had a problem where I wanted to, expose, we're talking that OIDC external authorization, auth and everything. I was like, let me throw that problem at like Gemini and Claude and whatever's out there. How would you tackle that? And let me tell you, not a single one was even close to the way that you, not only hallucinating things that it could do, even just not approaching or understanding the problem. And as you like gently guided it towards what you want, it got better, but it just kept hallucinating functionality that even though I knew where I wanted to go and I was trying to guide it there, it wouldn't have got me there. That leaves me not a lot of promise that this current generation is going to do what everybody thinks it is, but I think it's going to help us with our writing. I think it's going to help us, simplify and summarize things. I think it's going to create wonderful transcripts right now. I think it is going to get better, but I do not think that it is in the realm of replacing anybody in tech. And unfortunately, if it is, it's folks that are at the low end of the spectrum, the people just coming into the jobs, that are really going to get the shaft because they don't get the benefit of learning. I'll go back, and I have another colleague that I've been building something with, and I know when he throws code into the AI and gives it to me, because one, it's commented, and two, the variable names are named appropriately, and three, it does the job, but it leaves giant barn holes or barn doors of security holes in work, or like, because it doesn't understand the internal context with we're running it, it can't actually be fit into this project without shoehorning it. It doesn't understand the nuance of requirements, or those just weren't laid out when somebody said, how do you do this, right? And so there is another level of, you sort of have to understand the technology and understand the requirements that you're working in under, and you have to understand the humanity of the people that you are working with, whether they can support this, whether they can understand, because you don't want to be in a situation where it's ever garbage in, garbage out. Nobody should ever be relying on the AI to like tell them how this stuff works. There should be people that understand fundamentally how that works to check this AI. But I think incorporating AI at parts of the chain where it is still solving for work that would just take you excess amounts of time, curating your drafts, fixing your English, that sort of thing. The validation, when we go in and work with customers, one of the first things that we do is set up like automated pre-commit checks and tests and validation, because those are the things that humans, even if you do reviews and you catch these problems, you then have to be like, hey, you need to fix this. And somebody's like, I don't need to fix this. And then you have to argue over why. Let the robots be the arbiter of those sort of things. So you don't fight, let them fight the robot. We'll tune the robot together. Don't fight me. So I think AI has to be in situations where it's like, fight the robot, not your mama. Like, but the real human situations governing production that might lead to outage, outages. People had this fear in the beginning of automation. Do we go that full level of automation while we still left like manual button overrides for things like rollback or things like, forcing a state change just so that somebody is aware and is like can be present in case something happens? I think that's where the state of AI is, but it is growing by the day. It is expanding by the day. That's also the worry, is that it expands so much that it consumes its own AI garbage. And then now, instead of the singularity, we just have the single, like
That's
words.
nice.
Yeah.
Something new about AI.
So I'm cautiously optimistic, but I have not moved any of my workloads wholeheartedly over to AI, just individual pieces.
Yeah. See is a tool, not the solution.
Yeah.
How do you see? Where do you see yourself working? Or what kind of things you will be doing in 5 years from now?
I hope it's cooking on an island somewhere that has bountiful food. And where I would like to be working. So I have always avoided climbing the chain in tech. I enjoy implementing, hands-on, figuring things out. Like that work keeps me going, and keeping busy solving problems is interesting to me, and that's what keeps me into the work. Now, I am also realized that I'm good at the human angle of this, and COVID kind of killed that. I'm no longer going on site with people. That was usually where you'd build a rapport, you'd learn, who hates who really controls the purse, what the real goals are, like where you stand, so that you could realign yourself and be like, okay, they're talking about this, but they're doing these sort of things. I would still like to be solving meaningful problems in tech at that point, and I would like to be dealing with people who are happy that we're there. I think we have developed a reputation that when we come in, we look at all the angles and we leave you happier than you were before. I wouldn't say we don't miss. When we miss, we let you know with plenty of data, and like it's something that we all have to shift and lean into. But I think we make people happy. And so where I want to be in 5 years, still doing this, making people happy, ideally moving forward with the wave of tech, because I feel like if you're not getting out there into the new stuff and feeling uncomfortable, like you don't know what you're talking about, and feeling afraid to like send a message in Slack or Discord because everybody's smarter than you, and oh no, you're going to look dumb. If you're not doing that, I don't think you're growing, and I don't think you're moving forward. And there was a period of time where I remained stagnant to focus on other parts of my life. But the past 5 years have been like getting back in, doing things that are uncomfortable, learning new stuff, balancing it with the work that pays for, the food on the table. And so in 5 years, I'd still like to be, if this thing that we do called Holos takes off, then I'll probably be like automating and helping people. If it didn't, we'll still be doing work, I'm sure, for Kubernetes. There'll probably still be Puppet still out there. Like recently, I was surprised. Ari Pienaar was in Portland, was coming into town. He was like, hey, Ben Ford's having a meetup at the Buy and Buy, and oh yeah, Ari's going to be there. I was like, what the heck is Ari doing in town? And we chatted with him about the state of current things. Talk about another mentor. Ari's somebody that like just immediately figures things and considers it at scale. I was a dumb little kid in 2009 having disagreements with him about data and at scale. Looking back now,
You dare?
what was I thinking? Ari's literally over here with a button on millions of machines that can do whatever. He's clearly figured some stuff out. But we were having a talk with him about the state of Puppet, and I was like, Puppet is dead. It is like, I don't see it expanding. I see it sort of like zombie Walking Dead tech. He was like, do you realize there are a lot of business out there that don't have any automation, that still just run scripts? He names off big ones that he was working with. He's like, so yeah, it's not the new technology, but there are people for which it could still benefit them. But like, don't fool yourself. The majority of work out there is still at a lower level. You might be riding the new wave, and that might be the new hotness out in Silicon Valley, and it might be a couple of those jobs, but do not be fooled. There is a whole world of other technology out there. And so, as much as I'd say, hopefully not doing like puppet stuff anymore, we'll probably be pulled into that. But being an individual contributor, working for this small consulting firm, I'm very happy at a small firm of 3 people that trust each other and communicate very well and have our same interests aligned, and the way that we work with people is very aligned. And so there have been times where there have been feast. There were some years we had way more work than we can deal with. And then, of course, there was famine where we were out there digging work. But we've always found that there's always going to be those projects. There's always going to be something that needs to be done. So in 5 years, hopefully doing the same thing, ideally having more work than we can address so that we have a lot of things on our plate, doing things that are interesting. And then, I'm 40, what year is this? 2004. So 3, I'll be 44 in a month. Way too young to retire, though, like way too old to retire in like the crypto space. You're supposed to retire by like 35 there. But still be doing things that are interesting. And even if I retired from tech, I would still want to be helping people. That was the reason why I started off at the school, was because I went to that school and I did not feel that they prepared me for the technological world that I was jumping in. And I wanted to come back and help out and prepare other people and say, hey, here's some programming. Here's where the world is now. Doing meaningful stuff that connects you with the human beings. And right now we're kind of in that corporate world. And at a certain point, it might feel dead inside, where you help this company meet their goals and solve their problems, but where is the humanity in it? Like, where are the people that you are helping? How are you leaving humanity better than they were before? And while I was working for Twitter, let me tell you, it felt like we were doing meaningful work, because it felt like they were combating against the onslaught of propaganda that had been rising since 2016. All the way up until the end, it felt like we were doing that fight. But then now we've shifted off to, what's the next fight? Where's the next place? So hopefully, still doing the same work, having another conversation with you in 5 years, maybe.
We will see. Next year, in 5 years, iteration 1025. We will try to discuss what happened in the meantime. By the way, do you do consulting works remotely, on site?
That's a good question. Since COVID, it's all been remote. We are happy to come on site. Businesses are no longer happy to pay for you to come on site, except like in the Silicon Valley, because we live in Portland, Oregon. That's an hour and a half flight down to San Francisco. And if you're based there, that flight's not expensive. Those hotels become expensive in the middle of the week, because that's when everybody comes in. But we're happy to go and do the work, because like I said, I think my superpower, I have never been the smartest or the quickest to pick up on tech, even though I feel I am smart and that I am quick. But I feel like my superpower is in that being able to quickly read a situation, being able to meet people where they are and explain it to them, but like translate those things and guide them to where they should be. And so I'm always happy to go on site with customers, because I think that is where I can do my job best with you, because what people saying and what people are doing internally can be 2 different things. And then, yeah, so not a lot. It's mostly remote now. It's mostly we get shipped a laptop and they, log in with that laptop, hope that everything works, then join our Slack and our stand up, and then we'll communicate from there. That's how it is. What about you? Are you going on site? You're probably all remote too.
After COVID, I used to travel every week before COVID across Europe mostly. And now most of my work is remote.
Yeah.
And honestly, I hate it. I mean, maybe before it was too much because really I was doing weekly moving every week, but to now is really I have to sometimes I have customers where I force them to go on site, or force in a good way, of course. But yeah, otherwise it's mostly remote. Almost everything remote, actually.
Yeah, I think you and I have those same similar skill sets to connect with people. At least I figured out when we first met and we're corresponding back and forth. And so it kind of feels kneecapped, I guess, a bit to not be able to go to exercise those skills. But I understand it. There's always a chase for this bottom line. And if you could do it remotely and if you still get the same work done, and even though videos are annoying, you can still communicate that way. I'm sure there will.
Yeah, yeah, you're right. Is anyway.
The life of a consultant. That's what
Yeah,
it is
that's
like
the consultant.
feast, famine, and then like isolation. I'm fortunate. My husband and I were able to like buy a house in Portland, and
All
we
right.
have space. And like, this is my room. You see all the music stuff is in the background because that's like in my personal time what I do. But I have a space that I can work as a little office and do that work. So I'm very thankful for that. I spent a lot of money for this house. I ought to spend some time here and justify all that damn cost. But I miss that person to
Those
person
kind.
communication. And when Ari was here, and I did actually go. Luke showed up too.
Oh,
Luke
really?
Anise
Cool.
from Puppet. In the past, he would be driving his bike that has a big bucket on the front that has the two twins in the front. Twins are not in there anymore. It's
No,
now
no.
it's now a dog, Wesley, the Dread Pirate Roberts, who he came up with his dog, and we saw a lot of folks from the past and talked about a lot of things. But that does, at a certain point, feel like almost like high school level reminiscing. So it was interesting to see people, but then also I was like, I am the person who will leave the party when things are going great silently, in the background. In the US, we call that the Irish goodbye. In Italian, I'm sure it's like the English goodbye.
Okay,
Right?
whatever, but okay.
Yeah, But there were good vibes, and it was good to see some of those folks, but also it felt like getting pulled back into that old world again. So I was like, okay, this is great. This is fun. I'll see y'all later. Goodbye. And then head on out.
Nice. So, Gary, any person I should invite to this podcast in the next occasions?
So that's hard for me because I don't like people. I just spent a whole bunch of time telling you connecting with people is my superpower, but the irony of that is I tend to avoid people and isolate in my own little
It
shell.
was all fake.
And it's just because there's too much going on. If there's too much stimulation, uh, all that messes with my head. I'm also from the age where, they didn't want you to get diagnosed with anything like ADHD or any sort of on the spectrum because, oh, that'll be on your permanent record forever. Never mind back in the days when I was in high school, the permanent record was pencil on some paper in some filing cabinet way back when. So it's just I'm sensitive to a lot of like noise and chatter around. But let's talk about people. I'm just getting plugged back in to social media on a business level. I took like 10 years off because it was just a little bit too much. And most of the people that I still keep in contact with are already on your list or have already been mentioned. Uh, it's always interesting to see what Nigel has in his hands in because he always does seem to find his way through to things. You've already had Nigel on. If you're in tech, you surely know who Kelsey Hightower is. But I feel like we're always hearing from Kelsey what's going on with like the new hotness. I do agree with what Nigel said that Alana Brown is probably a great person to talk to. I will tell you that one thing I enjoyed, or one thing that has been successful for me, has been the people that you work with who just get it and can extrapolate and see on to the next thing and the next thing. And when I was at Puppet working with the folks in the marketing side, feels like it would be hell because like you're selling and you're talking about whatever, but they had to basically interact with everybody in the community in ways that at times feels overwhelming for me, but they had to get the data and the metrics and figure out where that next step was. And that the DevOps guide that they did, like for that time in the industry, that was authoritative, that was awesome. It was finally getting metric data for how people were using, shaped what our way the tooling was going on. And Alana was part of the folks that were doing that kind of work. So I would be interested to see where she is nowadays. I'll need to think about that because off the top of my head, I wasn't prepared with the list of people. And really, the people that I interact with on a daily basis are like me, Jeff, and Nate, and then our customers. I haven't been going out to the meetups. So
well, let me know in case some new names pops up in your mind.
That would be great.
And maybe you know that I always ask the question that I haven't asked. So anything that you would like to reply to, which I hadn't asked?
The infamous, are there any questions that I didn't ask that I should be asking about the industry right now and about everybody? I think that everything that I wanted to talk about and joke about, I did get out. If we could predict where IT was going, I surely would be sooner to my island away from everyone and would have thrown all of my money on that technology. I think the security space is interesting. And as they keep adding things to DevOps, DevSecOps, DevSecPlatOps, Form Tech, like as they
Git and everything.
At the start of my career, security was like, what's that? Let's install a rootkit on every machine and hope for the best. And nowadays it is, where are the holes? Run this thing through this tool to see where you are like at risk. Have you like scanned for, have you passed all of this through security? I think the evolution of security, and we've had to, because obviously we've seen people use and abuse everything from the Internet of Things device that are in your house. I spend so much time making sure that those things aren't leaking, all the way up to like your platforms that you have to expose to the internet, that exposing anything to the internet nowadays feels like such a risky and a terrible thing that I think the quality of security tooling has advanced, and that seems very interesting to me. And that's ultimately what was driving the work that we were doing, because we wanted to shore up the external authorization, the single login, passing that data down to the application so that everybody can use it, so that you don't have to think about it, so that exposing something to the internet has already been wrapped in a safe and secure way. That's where we were, that ultimately drove us to the problems. We're thinking about that security space. Because I think that's at the forefront of our industry. Now, if you're talking into the weeds, obviously, AI is infecting everything, and the next generation of like containerization and people pulling back from the cloud. I think 10 years ago, everybody was moving to the cloud. Now it feels like a lot of people are pulling back because they have seen the cost or they have seen the limitation.
Gary, about this, is this a real trend, or is mostly hype in terms of this? Because I mean, I don't know how much the net flows between going to the cloud or going back from the cloud are still, I think. Do you have real scenarios like this?
So I know that when we were doing we were Google partners and doing consulting work, that when we were working with big customers, they often got breaks and discounts that justified the cost to move it out to the cloud. In fact, the thing that got us into Twitter, one of the earliest things, was they were wanting to do all of their Hadoop clusters and data processing out in the cloud. They were running on bare metal. They were like, let's try and do this out at the cloud level. And I believe Google had sweetened the deal to justify that. But in the age where we're clawing back money, those deals probably aren't as sweet as they were before. And there is always somebody running the cost of capital expenses and operational expenses and figuring out what's the best way to go. That I don't think we will see a business that, again, I keep coming back to Twitter because it's recency bias, that has entire data centers dedicated to them. Unless you are like literal Microsoft or Google or, OpenAI, probably. But I think that you can justify a rack of some servers as long as you are running the technology in the cloud and locally with the same workflow in a way that you can actually pivot locally in a way that doesn't add complexity and burden, because that alone is a huge spike of cost. If you're looking dollars to dollars, cloud in many cases doesn't make sense. But if you're looking at a managed service where like you have a nectar ring for 5 nines on a database somewhere, then maybe that justification is there. But if you can pull that back on site, and again, the tool that we have been working on, one of the fundamental plays for that was, why don't you use configuration management so that you can deploy it in a cluster that's out in the cloud or locally? One of the justifications for us wanting to do this on local clusters were people clawing back from the cloud. So I don't have a recent gig where the job was, we're not doing cloud anymore, pull that back. But in every gig, that question has been raised. And sometimes the justification was there, but I think that might be shifting out there in the industry. So I don't have hard data for that, but the conversation happens more than I've seen in the past.
Okay, we will see in 5 years what happens. What happened.
Yeah, everything, there's an ebb and flow for everything. And I think there's always a course correction to find out, where that hybrid is. So maybe we're just course correcting and narrowing in on something better.
Yeah. So, Gary, wonderful. You were like a river flowing words full of quite interesting. So, thank you for joining this iteration, and I hope see you somewhere sometime sooner or later. Who knows? I miss a lot the Puppet conferences around the world, definitely. But
you always have a place to stay out here in Portland. Let us know. I hope this has been sufficiently abnormal for you, because it was like, well, I got to come in being abnormal somehow. Here we go. You get the full me at my full power, being abnormal just for you, Al.
Wonderful. See you next time, Gary. Stay connected. I play the outro.
Abnormal DevOps Iterations.